COVID-19 has disrupted labour capacity globally, and here in Australia it's impacted the horticulture sector's ability to harvest crops. Today we're joined by Richard Shannon of Growcom, an industry body representing Queensland's fruit, vegetable and nut growers. Queensland's horticulture industry is worth over $3.1 billion per year at the farm gate, employing around 25,000 people. Hi Richard, welcome to the program. It's been a year now since the supply of seasonal and traditional labour dried up with COVID. What sectors have been the most vulnerable to these labour shortages?
Yeah, it's a really important question. We're hearing plenty of reports of impacts across the Australian economy. We can't forget the impacts on horticulture. We've been reliant on overseas workers for some time. 3/4 of our labour pool are backpackers, and so you'd appreciate with international travel stopping that it's had a huge impact on horticulture.
So the current seasonal labour shortfall sits at about 26,000 people. What are some of the initiatives aimed at filling that gap?
Yeah, so our labour situation is bad, but we continue to see it getting worse. Until international borders reopen, things are going to get worse unless we're able to bring in workers, for example, from Pacific Island nations who have historically come into Australia for this work, or unless we get many more Australians to take up these harvest roles. There's been a relaxation around the number of hours an international student can work. For example, there's also an additional incentive for domestic students. They can earn Austudy, youth allowance earlier should they do a certain amount of work in horticulture. So there's a range of different initiatives. There's also a lot of sort of regional work that has been going on, local and regional initiatives, tapping into parts of the community that maybe haven't been a big part of our labour pool previously. Things like trying to attract recently arrived Australians, migrant communities, tapping into school leavers, so people who are leaving grade 12 last year, they had a rough end of their schooling life and now probably scratching their heads wondering where they're going to get a job, so there's an enormous opportunity for them.
And are growers discovering their own solutions?
We had a great example of a chinchilla melon grower through his own personal networks, attracting a half dozen school leavers from Brisbane, kids who'd never left the big smoke, who found themselves out on a melon property in sort of central or western Queensland and having the time of their lives. Honestly, they couldn't have rated that experience more highly. So there are some really positive stories. Growers are also changing their employment practice. They're going to greater lengths to retain staff. What consumers maybe don't appreciate is how much manual labour goes into getting their fruits and vegetables into the grocery aisle. It's a really labour-intensive industry. In some crops in horticulture, 50% of our costs are labour costs. And for many of those crops, berries, for example, those costs are unavoidable right now. The technology doesn't exist to harvest those things. It requires fine motor skills. The best machine we've got are humans and will continue to be humans for some time. Looking forward though, this constraint, the labour constraint we have now, will probably propel innovation at a greater rate that was already in the pipeline.
What is your message to farmers who are having farm labour issues?
You need to think about your labour demands, your labour needs well in advance and advertise well in advance, and use social media, get online. There is a national farm labour marketplace or jobs board called Harvest Trail. Recommend you register your jobs on there and try and put in place some things that would make it easier for workers to find you, to stay with you longer term.
Thanks so much for your time, Richard. Let's hope this leads to new opportunities for people seeking work.
Thanks, Claudine. Thanks for having me on today, and also your interest in this issue. It's such an important one for horticulture and agriculture in Australia.
It's a big challenge for the industry at the moment, Claudine, and I think we might see higher prices in the supermarket as a result.